the deeper problem than the unwanted behavior is the fact that you have these unwanted desires. Now, why do you have these unwanted desires? It's because you get super dysregulated and your brain's looking for some type of medication or sedation for that. And pornography is a great pain medication, right? The problem is when you take pain medication over and over, you need more and more and more. And then, like for example, if you got a broken arm and you're taking pain medication to solve the problem, eventually that same pain medication can kill you, right? So it's like a good temporary relief, really bad long-term solution.
If you are running on fumes by 2 p.m., please listen to this.
Parenting, work, staying healthy, all the things, it can be a lot.
And we really need steady energy and not a morning crash or an afternoon crash. We want to be steady, energetic humans, and
that's why we started using H2 Tab. It's a tiny hydrogen tablet that does big things.
We have been exploring this for 5 years. So when we say we believe in this, we truly believe in this. It helps with recovery, gut health, energy, cellular health, helps against oxidative stress, recovering from workouts and travel, and so much more.
It's awesome. There's no sugar, there's no caffeine. It's just real natural support. And it's been backed by over 1,500 studies. It's one of the simplest wellness wins that we found, honestly. So go to drinkhh2tab.com and use code Bethany for 10% off.
Happy health.
Today, we're diving into a tough but incredibly important topic, one that impacts so many individuals, marriages, and families, and often in silence: pornography. Our guest is someone I have deep respect for because of his powerful testimony and the transformational work he's doing around the world. Mason Cain is the founder of Unchained Leader, a Christ-centered holistic program that has helped thousands of men in over 30 countries find true freedom from pornography and sexual addiction. Not just by white-knuckling it or avoiding temptation, but by addressing the root causes, renewing the mind, and reclaiming our God-given identity. He's worked with everyone from pastors to parents, guiding them through the deep heart work it takes to live free and lead well. Mason's story is raw, redemptive, and full of hope. And whether you're personally struggling, supporting a loved one, or simply wanting to protect your marriage and family from the trap of pornography, today's conversation is going to equip and encourage you.
Yeah, and we just wanted to touch on too, this topic is tough and it's more for adults. You know, we're getting into some of the nitty-gritties of pornography, so just be aware. I would, not have your children around. And at the end of the day, though, our heart is to inspire y'all to face this challenge and help those around you, and to know that there's help in something that's so challenging.
Welcome back to the All Things Possible podcast. We're here, of course, to encourage families in their faith and their journey. And one of the biggest problems that we're seeing in today's realm is pornography. It's a subject that we have a tough time talking about amongst families, with our children. And Bethany, can you tell me how? I'm not on Instagram, so you saw Mason online, yeah?
Yeah, so I've been following you, Mason, for a while. I don't know, you popped into my algorithms, but I loved what you're doing with the Unchained Leader. So I knew as soon as we launched the podcast that I was like, if we could get Mason on, that would be amazing. And I just think it's such a challenge in society right now. And yeah, I think you're more of the expert. So I'd love for you to just introduce yourself, share with our listeners what you do, and welcome.
Yeah, and thank you for that. It's cool how God works. And, it's interesting. Social media is a tool that the enemy uses for evil a lot, right? And what we've made a commitment to do is to use it for good and to shine light. And it's cool that, social media was what connected us, and we can have this conversation. And my heart and my goal for this conversation is to shine light on some stuff that I think we've allowed to exist in darkness for a little bit too long.
Right.
And that's how my story started as well is, when I was actually 5, and I actually didn't remember this event until I was going through the healing work, going back into childhood and starting to understand how all of these things that happened in my past were actually contributing to the addictive symptoms that I was experiencing as an adult. But when I was 5, there was an inappropriate sexual interaction with an adult that happened, and I didn't really comprehend what had happened at that point, but I remember going kind of away from that event, and there was like this voice that started, right? And the voice was like, that was a bad thing to do, right? And the voice was like, you're a bad boy. And then moving into around 10 years old, I was exposed to pornography for the first time. And it was like this curiosity and kind of this, realm that had opened up for me at 5 now had an outlet to explore the curiosity. And it just kind of took a life of its own really fast and got really deep and really dark really fast, to the point where, there were some things that I had reenacted that I'd seen in porn in like age 11, right? And then it started, not just you're a bad person, but, at age 11, I entered this like a unknown agreement with the enemy of like, you can never tell anybody that you did this stuff for the rest of your life.
Right. Wow, that started so young. And
I feel like
seems
that's
like it
more
escalated really fast.
Right. And
Yeah.
seems more common than you think too.
It is. And, we're seeing the average age of exposure going even younger and younger with the increase in technology. So right now it's about 8 years old is the average age of exposure. And, I think that talking about it and shining light on it is a really important thing, because that's, for me, like, it became a secret. I grew up in a very religious household, and I got caught one time, and I just remember the feeling inside of the house was like, it was like somebody died, right? And like I knew that I had caused that. So then from that point forward, like I got really good at hiding it. And that carried into adulthood, and then carried into, eventually getting into the point where I started working through and like discovering all the root issues. So, I don't know how far in depth you want me to go in the story part, at this point, or if you guys want to just kind of converse off of different topics.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot we could dive into for sure. So you grew up in a Christian family, and did that feeling of like, I can't share this, that talked about that feeling of just felt like someone died in your household. Why does that kind of trigger a sense to like bottle up and not like, share that with my family and work through something that needs to be dealt with?
And I didn't understand this at the time, right? But it was the difference of I did something bad versus I'm a bad person, right? And at that age, when that event happens, and I grew up in a more of a religious household, just based off the denomination that my family went to at that time, where there's more rules and you don't do this, and your job is to be a good example for other people. So it's like clean yourself up and make yourself look good and hide the dirty stuff.
Right.
And so when the feeling of like my parents' reaction to it, and it was like this negative event, like I knew that I'd caused that, and I'd already tried to quit, right? And I couldn't. And so this belief that started at 5 of like, you're a bad boy, like it started to repeat itself, as 10, 11, 12, and then even into adulthood. But it's like the difference between picking up shame, which is like, I'm a bad person, and then, conviction of like, I did a bad thing. And at that age, like I wasn't equipped with the tools to realize that I was actually picking up shame, which drove it deeper.
Yeah, it's like the unwanted behaviors are symptoms of deeper issues, like what you were pointing at.
So then fast forward, you got married, and at some point things got real problematic, because I feel like that's really dysfunctional in a marriage, and the wife can sense it and she can feel the disconnect. Can you please paint the picture of like what your marriage felt like at kind of like the peak of the challenging season, I guess?
Yeah, a few things. Like, I thought that marriage would solve this problem, right? Because like one of the things that I believed is, I had this sexual energy and I didn't have an outlet for it. And when I get married, I'm gonna have an outlet for it, and like that'll solve the problem. And that's just 100% not true. And I realized that in the first few weeks.
Wow.
And so, even at the point of being intimate with my wife, it was like the drive and the desire, the unwanted urges for pornography were still there just as strong. And so it was like it didn't satisfy or fill the void that I had. And then as far as the marital dynamic, because this leading into marriage and then getting married, I had just kind of accepted that this was something that I would struggle with, and I would like, my solution was, because I couldn't fully quit, like I'd failed at that 100,000 times, it felt like. My job was like, I'm gonna just manage this and keep it at bay the best as possible, and that was the best thing that I could do. So, in my mind, like I didn't want to burden my wife with it. So, we got married, didn't disclose to her that it was a problem. Throughout our marriage, there was, a disconnect and like tension and conflict in the marriage. And it was like, even though this was a secret thing for me, it was showing up of knowing that I was living out of integrity and out of alignment. And there was also this subconscious fear of getting found out. And so I didn't want to get too close, or like let her get too close to where I could potentially get found out, because it felt scarier if we were too close. So there was almost like this emotional disconnect that I subconsciously created, and that caused a lot of conflict. And kind of what you were mentioning is she sensed something was going on, but like didn't know.
Right.
Yeah, that's rough. I mean, we've been through our own journey too, and are working through it as well. And it's definitely something where they just have that intuition. I think the Lord gives our women, our wives, this desire to connect, and we do want to connect too. But when you feel that shame or guilt and that separation, because you feel like it's something that, like you said, you don't want it to be found out. You don't want to create that connection. And I was thinking, as you were talking, like growing up in a Christian family, and you read the Bible and you know that the Lord can perform miracles. So I know you probably prayed a lot, like, Lord, take this away from me. Stop this.
Yep.
Why won't this issue depart from me? And I don't want to do, like when Paul says, I do the things I don't want to do, but I keep on doing them. So what did you find, where was a pivotal moment where you're like, okay, this is, I'm still struggling with this. I'm disconnected from my wife. Where was this aha moment in your life where something just kind of, you figured something out, I guess?
Yep. Yeah, I'll give you two things. This was the number one thing that like ripped a tear in my relationship with God, because I did a few things. At 15, I decided I'm gonna get, like, I can't do this alone. I need to do it like I need God. So I got baptized. And I remember walking into the water and like fully believing that when I came up, like this was gonna finally be solved.
That'd be awesome. Yeah.
It would be awesome, right? And I 100% believe that was the case. And, it was about less than 24 hours later, I realized that all these unwanted urges and stuff were still there. So I started to get a little frustrated at God then. And then it was like, okay, well, now that I'm baptized, like I've given my life to Jesus, like, I was crying out to God, asking him to take it from me, and he just didn't, prayed that prayer 1,000 times. And then, even coming from a conservative background, like I got to the point of like, I need a deliverance prayer, right? And that was kind of like outside of the realm of how I grew up.
Right.
And then that didn't work. And so like it challenged my theology, right? So one of the things that God kind of revealed to me in scripture, and just in a way of like, I was reading the story of God's people being in captivity under bondage of Pharaoh, right? In Egypt. And as I'm reading through the story, like I just got this parallel of like, this is so similar to addiction, any form of bondage, right? And it's like God's people were praying and crying out to God to save them. And God could have taken them, teleported them into the promised land, right? But he didn't in that case. But what he did do is he led them on a journey. That journey had a lot of challenges, right? That journey created a lot of refinement in the people that went through it, right? And then eventually the people that entered the promised land were like a new generation of those people.
Yeah.
And so for me in my life, like, you know, I do believe that, like, I've talked to people and I've heard tons of stories of people, you know, going through a deliverance prayer, and it's like God delivered them from this, right? I don't discredit God's power to do that and to choose to do that. For my life and for a lot of other people's lives, like, he didn't do that. He chose to lead me on a journey. And I'm thankful for that now, because along that journey of a lot of really hard work, a lot of digging in and facing things that I never wanted to bring up again from my past or even think about. Along that journey, like, God used that to forge me into the person that I am. And I think, you know, men and women, men especially, like, we're not created, we're forged, right? Like, you're created a male, but like, you're forged into a man. And like, that forging process for me, most of the development happened along the path of like actually going back to childhood, actually figuring out what these root issues are, actually figuring out, you know, why I had these unwanted behaviors and unwanted desires, and starting to heal all of these wounds that the enemy had woven throughout my life below my subconscious awareness, right? So that's how I made peace with that. You know, like, God did answer my prayer. He just didn't answer it in the timing that I wanted or the way that I wanted. You know, I would have really loved that teleportation experience of just like, boom. But now being on the other side of it, like, I'm thankful it was a journey. I'm thankful it was hard work.
Yeah. What are some of the symptoms of someone who doesn't go on that journey? Let's say a husband, a father, they're struggling, they're angry with the Lord, with not taking this sin or the desire for you know, pornography and other issues they may be facing, that addiction. If someone's just trying to white-knuckle through life and try to stop by themselves, what's the symptom of not facing that?
So it's interesting. Pornography, and we work with all sexual addictions, right? So, you know, it was like pornography, masturbation. We work with guys that, you know, it's strip clubs or escorts or massage parlors. Like, the list is long, but these are all coping mechanisms that your brain's actually using for a really creative solution, right? And so the deeper problem than the unwanted behavior is the fact that you have these unwanted desires. Now, why do you have these unwanted desires? It's because you get super dysregulated, and your brain's looking for some type of medication or sedation for that. And pornography is a great pain medication, right? The problem is, when you take pain medication over and over, you need more and more and more. And then, like, for example, if you got a broken arm and you're taking pain medication to solve the problem, eventually that same pain medication can kill you, right? So it's like a good temporary relief, really bad long-term solution. So what we see is, you know, even guys that are like, hey, I'm gonna abstain from the behavior, right? But they don't go on the healing journey. Well, it's kind of like you have this volcano of dysregulation and you try to patch the pornography side, and then it erupts somewhere else. Right. You blow up on your kid, you blow up on your wife. Like, this dysregulation is oftentimes comes out in frustration, right? Anger, rage, all of these things. And then another coping mechanism is the opposite of that, right? Which seems kind of odd, but the same way that somebody will actually regulate themselves with like anger and rage is the same that somebody will just completely withdraw into isolation, right? And so what they're doing is they're trying to cope with life, but the reason that they're so dysregulated is because they have all of these deeper wounds that are being triggered. It's just below their conscious awareness, right? So the problem seems to be the behavior, the unwanted behavior. That's just a solution that you're using to try to like regulate yourself. Being dysregulated is a little bit deeper problem, right? But what's causing the dysregulation is actually where the solution lies, right? Like, why am I getting so dysregulated in this situation? It's because, you know, you've believed lies about yourself, lies about other people, lies about God, lies about the world, lies about life, you know, all of this stuff. And those were all, like, again, most of those are programmed in adolescence, and then most adults never go back to consciously process these things after they have the capability to do so.
Wow. That seems crazy to think too, like, yeah, you would just kind of get stuck in a cycle, so to say, of internalizing or exploding, and it's never being dealt with, and you just think that's how you are. Or you just, you don't even have the ability to think outside of your circumstances because you are so dysregulated, right?
And that's the enemy's goal, right? Is like, he is the tempter and the accuser, right? And so you have all of these root wounds, which there's a good portion of those that are strategically planted by the enemy, in my opinion, and like we can kind of cipher through those. So like he plants the wounds, then he gives you the temptation of, you know, pornography or whatever is going to actually medicate that, right? And then he accuses you of taking it. And so now you buy into, this is just who I am, this is just what I do, and, you know, this is how things are going to be. And it's like, now you've bought into a broken identity that's a life sentence, unless you realize it's a lie, right? And that's why, again, like, not again, but like one of the things that we are very careful about, and like I would caution anybody that has any addiction, is sitting in a circle of people every week and saying, hi, Mason, I am an addict. That's not true.
Right.
You may be experiencing the symptoms of an addiction, but God did not create you with the identity of I am an addict. And as soon as we buy into that, now we've bought into the belief that because I'm an addict, I'm always going to have these temptations and these vices, and so therefore I need to grab onto weekly groups for life, accountability, blockers and apps, and, you know, white-knuckling it and willpower and all of this stuff. And it's like, just because you have abstinence from the vices doesn't mean you're free, right?
Right.
And so when you're chained here between, you know, either giving in and feeling the guilt and shame from that, and then you're trying to chain yourself to all of these other behavior modifications to keep you from going there, you're still tormented, right? And then in the midst of torment, the enemy is sapping all of your strength that's needed to actually carry out your kingdom assignment and why God put you here on earth. And even though you're abstinent from the actual behavior, like, the enemy still wins. And that's what I experienced in my life. Like, I spent most of my journey here trying to like not give in to this stuff by hanging on to this stuff, trying to not give in to this behavior by grabbing these behaviors for behavior modification. It was like, man, I was in a life or death battle with these like internal urges that were boiling up, that were dysregulating me. And by the time I like got those at bay, like I didn't have really, I was tired all the time. Like, you know, chronic fatigue syndrome is what I felt like. Even though I was like, you know, I broke the addiction because I'm not giving into the behavior. And it's like, yeah, but man, you're tormented all the time. Like that, that's not the version of freedom that like Christ came here to lead us to.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you too, because, you know, a lot of our listeners may have similar worldviews, but to someone who's listening who's like, maybe I should stop porn, like maybe we have some young men here or more older men, but they don't necessarily share the same worldview. Like, do you have any kind of plea or, you know, like, why should a man stop looking at porn? You know, maybe he's not married and he just is just doing it to kind of get through this season, so to say, like, but he might not have the same worldviews. Like, what would you say to that man or woman? Like, as a, like, maybe you should consider not doing this for the like sake of your future.
Yeah, I'll give you two things. So, number one is a quality of life, right? And so this is just from a pure brain science standpoint, but the dopamine hit that you get from pornography is considered a like super dopamine dose, right? And so it's more like, if you think about, like, we won't go too into detail here, but if you think about watching something that is very heightened on a screen, the dopamine hit and the feeling that you get from that versus, hey, I'm gonna go outside and ride my bike, right? This is much more exciting, right? And so what's interesting is your brain builds a tolerance to dopamine very, very quickly. And so that's why you need a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more with pornography and any sexual addiction, instead of like the increase in amounts, which would be alcohol and drugs. It's increase in variety, right? This is why you get into deeper, darker stuff that you never thought you'd be into, right? Because your brain now needs another genre in order to get the same dopamine hit. But when you're getting that, and especially if you're getting it on a daily or even weekly or monthly basis, going outside and riding your bike is just not going to do the same thing to your brain as this will, right? And so now you've entered into a season of life where, or you're creating the situation where life could be pretty good and you just don't have the level of fulfillment that God designed your brain to have with those things because you're bringing all of these other things in. Does that make sense? The other second thing that I would give you is you're actually practicing and conditioning your brain to operate in an avoidance mentality, right? And so when things get hard, when things get stressful, you escape into pornography, right? So you've not just formed a neural pathway of, hey, things get hard, I go into porn, or I go into whatever the vice is, right? You've formed a neural pathway of, when things get hard, I lean out of life instead of into the problem. And so now from a success standpoint, if you really take a step back and look from a 30,000 foot view and just observe your behaviors, it's like, when things get hard, what do? Do I lean into it and face it head on? Or do I lean out? And it's like, if you're practicing leaning out all of the time when things get hard and you get dysregulated and you go to pornography or like whatever your vice is to get the dopamine hit to feel better about yourself, you're subconsciously programming yourself that anytime things get hard, you also lean out, right? And this is gonna affect your income, it's gonna affect your relationships, it's gonna affect every single aspect of life. And that's what most people don't see, is it's like, I'm chief sinner here, right? Like, I lived this. I believed that it was just this isolated thing that nobody knew about, that only affected that area of life. And then I'd, pray for forgiveness and, God would forgive me. But it's like, even if you're forgiven, you still have consequences.
Right.
Like, God doesn't always take those away. And so the consequence was, this bled into every area of my life and the way that I was programming myself to operate. And those are two of a lot of different things. But this is a psychological problem that has brain implications and also happens to have spiritual consequences, right? But you don't have to buy into the beliefs in this book to realize that this is still negatively affecting you.
Yeah. That's powerful to understand and really eye-opening. I feel like probably for a lot of people.
Yeah, because I feel like so much of society, I think it's something like, I don't know how many percentage of men are looking at porn, but not all those people are faith-based and they think it's just fine. And like young boys are starting really young, and then lo and behold, later on they get into a relationship and they can't maintain that relationship because they've already developed so many, I forget the word you were using, Mason, but like their brain is wired in a way that they just cannot maintain the relationship no matter how hard they try.
Yeah. Well, it affects your sex life too, right? So like, especially, like, I was taught about sex from pornography.
Right.
Right? Like, even before the birds and the bees conversation, like, I found porn and everything that I knew about sex was from the porn industry, right? Which is all pleasure-based. And so when you get into a marriage, you believe that the marriage bed is for pleasure, right? And pleasure comes as a indirect benefit, right? Because God designed pleasure. It's not a bad thing. But when you're pursuing it, it ruins the entire design of how God designed sex, right? And so sex in marriage is purposeful. And when you're pursuing the purpose of intimacy and connection, the pleasure pops out as a benefit of that, right? But there's a giant difference of pursuing the pleasure versus pursuing the purpose and then getting pleasure out of it, if that makes sense.
Right.
And so, we got these guys too. Like, it doesn't matter if, you're abiding by the principles in these books or, what your belief system is, but do you want a good sex life or a bad sex life? Like, do you want your wife to come out of a intimate encounter with you to go, she feels fulfilled, or do you want her to feel drained every time, right? Because when you're pursuing pleasure, like, the dynamic is your spouse comes out and they feel drained, and it's just not quite, it just feels off.
I've spent my whole life in the ocean, and I've learned, just like wearing a seatbelt or a helmet, safety matters. That's why my family and I use shark bands.
Shark Bands uses patented magnetic technology to deter sharks by disrupting their electroreception. Kind of like a bright light in their eyes that says, nope, not today, shark face. No batteries, no charging, just simple, effective peace of mind.
Whether we're surfing, swimming, or just splashing around, Shark Bands is our go-to for ocean safety.
You want to geek out on how it works? Dive into episode 14 for a deeper look at the tech.
And check the show notes for the link to Shark Bands, because your peace of mind in the ocean is worth it. Stay safe, stay stoked, and keep loving the ocean.
Ultimately, as a Christian, you're looking at our identities. That's a powerful thing to look at, because the enemy is trying to break our identities, and how you said, just put us into that cycle of planting those experiences that you have, and then the shame, the temptation, and giving into that. When did you start recognizing that I need to anchor myself in the identity of Christ, and here's how I do it? Here's the things I need to deal with to get there.
Yeah, it was an interesting journey for me because I had gone through counseling, therapy. Like there was a point where I knew that I needed to do something and like I needed outside help, right? Mm-hmm. At that point, I checked into a program. That program basically took a week with me to compile a list of everything that I did and told me that I need to come home and like expose that entire list to my wife, right? And like that's the secret to breaking free from an addiction, is just get everything in the dark into the light. It's part of it, right? Mm-hmm. Hindsight, that was a very damaging experience because I came home and disclosed everything to my wife, and like there was zero structure, zero support, and they were just like, all right, good job, man. That just started, my journey. And so then I went to counseling and therapy, and I'm like reading books and, all this stuff. There was this point where even after doing all of that stuff, I was still relapsing pretty frequently. Yeah. My wife knew. We had a conversation that ended in, logistics of divorce rather than just talking about it. And I became suicidal at that point. And I was like, if I'm trying all this stuff and it's still not working, I feel like I tried everything. I don't want to continue doing this. And I was like praying for God to send my wife a husband that, was worthy of being her husband, and send my son, a dad that can, lead him in the right direction, because I couldn't at that point. And somewhat in that moment, not like God came riding down on a cloud, but there was just this thought that was pretty clear that it was God, and it was like, hey, what if I have all of the tools of all of this work that I've been doing, and it's kind of scattered on all these different things, and I need to put it together.
Organization.
And organize it, right? And when I was at the point of not even just contemplating suicide, but I was having a negotiation with it, I started to have these thoughts of my childhood, and we talked about age 5. I had that thought of 5. I had that thought at like 10, 11 when I did stuff that like I swore I'd never tell anybody. And like I got real mad at God, right? I was like, dude, like where were you when I was 5, man? Like I was 5. I didn't have the ability to know what was going on. Like there was no ability to protect myself.
Yeah.
Like even 10 years old, you know, like where are you at? And I was getting mad. And the like feeling that I got is like, you need to go back to those places. And you need to use like organize all the stuff that you have to like go back to those places because like there's something there, right? Because I was so emotional thinking about that. And that started the journey of like, let me revisit these events. Like at that point I had learned, you know, what a belief is and how it's formed and how it's a narrative that you tell yourself about an event. So like I start dissecting all of this stuff and I'm like journaling it. And I'm doing this like every day, right? I was like, hey, I'm either gonna go all out and figure this out. So like I woke up at 5 a.m. And I'm like listening to praise and worship music. I'm reading my Bible and I'm like going deep into psychology of like these events. And then I'm taking all of that stuff and I'm bringing it to like a licensed therapist and counselors, and then I'm unpacking it with them. And I started learning about like IFS and a bunch of other stuff. But, you know, long story short of going through that process, like I started to, like we call them root issues now, right? And they come in like various different forms of what creates a root issue. But as I started to realize these things, realize the lies that I was believing, the self-protective covenants that I formed, all of this stuff, it's like, you know, I started to enter seasons of my life over the next few months. It was like 30 days was kind of a threshold, and then 60 and like 90 days where something super stressful would happen, where I would normally, without even thinking about it, go right to like, I got a desire to watch porn and I would just go do it, right? And I realized these things would happen and these triggers would pop up and it's just like, oh, that's interesting. Like, I'm not driven to my unwanted behaviors, right? And then that like started to alleviate as I started to actually work through this stuff. One of the things that helped me connect that was I started in that same time, like just went all out on like studying scripture, and I started studying the original translations of verses, right? And so like if it was written in Greek, like what's the Greek word mean? If it was written in Hebrew, what's the Hebrew word mean? And one of the verses is, you know, Paul talking about don't be conformed to the pattern of this world, right? Like my addiction was a resist, fail pattern, right? Be transformed by renewing your mind. And when I started breaking that verse down in Greek, the word renewing, because that's what we're supposed to be doing, is like renewing your mind, actually is more similar to the word renovation. And when you think about the renovation of a house, it's like if you're going to renovate a house, you don't just put drywall on old drywall and, you know, new countertops on old countertops. It's like, no, there's a demolition phase first, right? And so I was trying to add on verses and practices and blockers and all of this stuff, but I'd missed the demolition phase of like going back to childhood, recognizing all of the root issues that I had, like going through a demo phase of that before I started constructing. And then the other clue there was be transformed by renewing your mind. Well, the word transformed actually means to go back to what always has been, right? And so it's this clue of God created you in his image, right? The enemy wove all of these lies and like false identities and all this stuff throughout my life, and it's like you're clearing all of that out to get back to like God's original intention for you, right? Not to become something different, but get back to like who you actually are as you were created in God's image.
Did you find that on your journey? Like you said, around 90 days, you were starting to feel like, whoa, I'm not wanting to go towards that addiction anymore. What was that feeling like after about 90 days or so? And how did that affect your relationship? And yeah, where was your wife in that journey too? I'm curious as well.
Yeah, so I'll answer both of those. The first thing I'll answer is like the experience. The 90-day threshold was a huge deal for me, and it was that same experience of like things would get stressful, and I would just notice like the urge wasn't quite there. And then like if we fast forward multiple years into freedom, like full transparency, this has been, and I kind of alluded to it when we, before we started recording, but we're getting hammered from, ad compliance, and like there's a lot of resistance in a lot of areas of my life right now, and there's a very challenging season for me, right? And in this season, I still feel a level of dysregulation, but instead of that energy like driving towards escaping, it's driving towards like this desire to just lean in, right? And it's not just lean into the problem, it's like, man, I'm only listening to praise and worship music and not putting anything else in my mind. Like my prayer time, absolutely non-negotiable. Like my exercise time, I'm getting that in, and it's like I'm leaning into this concept we teach in our program, which is principle over preference. And it's just like, my preferences go out the door, and it's like we're leaning into principle. And it's cool to see that when you get in those challenging circumstances, like that, being at that place of healing allows you to, really move forward and advance even when things get hard. As far as my wife goes, in the 90 days and then, throughout the other years of my healing journey, I really wish I could tell, a husband and a wife that like, hey, when your husband breaks free, like your marriage is going to be, just everything's going to be fixed, right? Or tell the husband like, hey, when you break free, like your wife is just going to be, right there. And what's interesting about the healing process is, number one, you got to understand, like for me, I'd been secretly struggling for a really long time. At the point that I disclosed to my wife, her timeline just started, right? Because she didn't even know this stuff was going on. And so the stuff that I had already processed and like kind of understood and then told her, like she just started the timeline of processing at that point, right? And so we've had around 9,000 guys come through our program at this point, and the majority of them are married. We have a couple hundred single guys as well, but almost every single time, and like I would just state that you should probably count on this, the wife's healing from betrayal, the timeline on that's a little bit longer than the guy, right? And so typically what we see is, and what I experience is like, 90 days and like a year threshold for the guy is like, I'm good, man, Wife's still working through stuff, right? It's a healing journey that I think that we, from the addiction side and the betrayal side, like we work through this for the rest of our lives, right? But at the point of getting to this place of like, man, like everything's great, the guy gets there a lot faster. And so, my wife has come a really long way. And I think that a lot of that, just for anybody listening, is it's like, as the guy that betrayed your wife, it's like there's gonna need to be probably a reset of expectations of like the amount of patience you need to have in that journey, and like the time and the space that you need to allow your wife to have for that.
I was curious how many of the 9,000 men finished the program. So I'm sure you get guys that sign up but don't finish it. Do you know that?
Yeah, so when we first started out, it was about 60% of the guys. And then we would figure out like kind of where they dropped off in the process, and then we'd make sure like, hey, we need to make sure we get an accountability call here, or we're gonna make sure that there's some type of like group call that we need them to get on. And then we did a bunch of like really interesting stuff to try to like play this game of like, how far can we get these guys down the road, right?
Yeah.
Over the last few years and like through refining this process over and over, we get about 80% of the guys, awesome. Which is much higher than most industry standard. But then it's like, but there's still that 20%, right? And
they might come back around at some point too.
And they might come back around, and the other thing is like, it's this process, like even if everything's laid out for you, even if it's proven, like you're gonna get out of it what you put in, right? And we do see some of those guys, like we have a really cool like community group, and we'll see guys post in there sometimes like, hey guys, I enrolled into the program 2 years ago, fell off the bandwagon, and like, this happened in my life. I'm like, I'm restarting, and it's cool to see the guys like rally around that guy. And it's, we do see that 20% come back in, but it's just, it's how it works,
Right.
And I don't think we got
we'll
clear.
fight for 80.
I mean, 80 is
81.
amazing.
Yeah,
like that's really
incredible.
a high number. So I would be like, woo,
Yeah.
you, cheering the crew on.
It's mainly my team. We have a huge team. A lot of the guys that have come through the program like now work for the program, but I can only reach out to so many people. But we have this really cool support system, and like our team's designed a really cool process to help these guys, push through to the end.
Yeah, and I don't think we got really clear earlier about Unchained Leader and what you learned and went through. You created this program for other men and some women too, correct? To jump in the program and heal from these addictions and wounds. And it's just an incredible thing.
I had another major question because I feel like it's
Perfect.
a big issue within the Christian church is most Christians don't know how to handle pornography. When they find out their brother or sister is in that struggle, they kind of like almost like freeze up and like you said, almost like the reaction of your parents at your 11-year-old age self. Like, I feel like it's such a bummer because I feel like the church should be equipped to handle this, and yet the church might be very unequipped.
Right. If not more damaging.
If maybe damaging. Do you have any encouragement to, maybe if we have any church leaders or people who have felt that damaging kind of effect from the church?
Yeah, 100%. And I that was a really highly negative experience that I had as far as like trying to go to church for help. And it was kind of the same feeling. It was like this whole funeral thing over again, like somebody died or something. It was like, oh, it was like kind of somber. I think a few things. Number one is like, I think that one of my missions is to help as many people as possible avoid that experience of like the church counsel I got was like, it made me feel like I was like one of the only ones, right? And like we just, at this point, like the data is pretty clear. The vast majority of men struggle with this. Like we have studies that are published in like 77% of Christian men, and that's Barna research, and there's a few other ones. That's assuming everybody's telling the truth on the anonymous survey, but from what we've seen, it's a very high percentage, right? So that's number one, is like, we got to understand this is not like this is every man's battle. This is not like this one guy in the congregation has this big problem, right? As far as church leadership goes, it's like encouraging the guy to not pick up shame, but pick up curiosity of like why this is going on, right? And understanding that like, hey, this does have spiritual consequences, but there's also like a psychology side to this of like, there's a reason why you have these unwanted desires and behaviors, and like, you need to work through that, right? So if the church has, people on staff that are like well versed in walking somebody through that, then that's awesome. I don't know of any direct church that has that set up in that process, but that would be really cool.
It would be cool if you guys like almost like cold email all the churches and be like, hey, let's set up like some programs so we can raise up some strong unchained leaders within our church. Like my mind's running with all the ideas.
Yeah.
We're
working on some stuff like that.
But I'm sure pastors, I mean, some of those men who are struggling are probably pastors, and so they literally cannot step into the leadership to lead their church out of that because they themselves are struggling. Wow, it's just kind of like almost a little overwhelming when you
that's
start
even
to
as a
think about
father,
it.
when you think about our boys and the children, how can a father lead their children through this glaring issue of today without processing through it themselves? I think that's powerful to have this tool that you've created to process that and create the anchored identity, working through that so that you can lead your family well. And if you're a pastor, lead your church family well.
Yeah. We have a couple hundred pastors in our program. We have a special group for them, which is really cool because pastors are always pouring out, and serving everybody else, and it's tough for them to find a safe space.
Right.
So like it's cool for us to be like, hey, let us serve you, right? And we have this group of pastors. But that's like the solution for the church in most circumstances is acting as triage, right? Like bringing in, making sure they're picking up curiosity, not shame, like encouraging them that there are actually some like problems going on they can figure out that will lead to a solution. And then it's like transitioning them into somebody that's specialized in this problem. Like our program is a great option for that. And we get a ton of referrals that way. And then, we're working on building out some like men's studies and stuff to like implement in churches to be kind of proactive about it.
Sweet.
And then what you're talking about as far as fathers, Adam, like a lot of the guys that come into the program and like start going through our program is for that fact. It's like, I'm struggling with this and I've been struggling with this. And then my 14-year-old just asked me for help with it. And it's like, I'm still struggling with it too. How am I going to lead him out of this? And like that conviction leads them to take action, figure it out. And then like we've seen many times where the dad will actually enroll his son.
Yeah.
And then like we have father and son on our group coaching calls and like they're both battling this together. And it's like the bond that comes out of that is really, really cool.
Wow.
Awesome. Yeah, it's powerful. I can understand why the enemy is attacking you and the organization because this is such powerful work. It's making kingdom difference, 100%.
That's the mission and the drive, man. I think that and we like it's women too. We have a couple hundred women in our women's program, and that's led by our women coaches.
I've heard that like the rate of women getting addicted to pornography is like growing at a pretty fast rate.
It's increasing.
That's super interesting. I mean, like I haven't had that,
Temptation.
draw towards that.
The enemy.
But yeah, it's just kind of scary.
The enemy's strategy there too is interesting and evolving, right? Like the women that come into our program, a lot of them started out in novels, right? And that's the guys, they're not typically getting pulled into the trap through novels. But on the women's side, it's very common of like these very dark, sensual novels and like series. It starts there, and then those books mention different types of pornography, and then there's a curiosity to like go search that on the internet, and then it's getting sucked in that way. So I think that's part of why we're seeing it more and more. And then, it's not pornography, but we have, if you're a Christian woman and it's like, you're in a book club and you guys are reading these novels, it's like there's, like I would just say there's some caution around that,
right.
Based off of what we've seen.
So do you have any advice like for a man, or it's even, let's say a wife or a father suspects or they know that their 14, 15-year-old is struggling with pornography or any other addiction, what do you recommend for a father to do? Like, is there things that he could do practically in a home rather than just saying, hey, stop it, that's bad? Obviously, going through Unchained Leader would be extremely beneficial. How would you approach that conversation?
So, and it's interesting, this would be the same conversation for pastors too, right? So it's like the two S's, which are support or save, right? So like as a dad, you want to support your kid, and you also want to like naturally you want to be their savior, right? Your best role is to support and guide them to help, right? And support them along that journey. I would say key things are going to be, number one, like making sure that you're not making it a shameful thing, right? Like, hey, you did a bad thing, but you're not a bad person, right? Also helping them understand it's a very common thing. And I think the most powerful thing is, for example, if a dad, like, I'm thankful for my journey because I know it's not if my son is exposed to pornography, it's when, right? And like anybody listening, it's not if your kid's going to be exposed to pornography, it's when, right? And so I now have this position where whenever that time comes, I have a testimony that I can share, Like, hey, like I struggled with this for a long time, man. Like, here's the way that it affected me. Like, here's all the stuff that I tried that didn't work. Like, here's what I figured out that did work. Like, and like, you know, my son asked what I do when I, you know, go on work trips, and I was like, I help people from stage. And, you know, I could be like, you know, when I'm helping people, like, this is the stuff that we're teaching them, right? So I think a shared experience and like transparency and vulnerability allows your child or anybody that comes to you to not pick up shame about it, right? Yeah. So that's number one. And then just taking an honest check of, am I trying to be a savior here and like bring them to the finish line, or am I supporting them along the journey, right? And I think that, you know, there's some people that may be equipped to do both, right? But encouraging an external source to help guide them, right? I think somewhat similar in marriage, where it's like, you know, if your spouse is struggling with something, it's like sometimes you want to be their savior, but because of the relationship dynamic, like sometimes you're the last person that can actually save them, right? And you need to support them into getting outside help, because the relationship dynamic from a professional to them is actually more beneficial in a healing environment than like you two, if that makes sense. So,
totally.
And not that you can't do both, right? But most of the cases, that's a little bit healthier relationship dynamic.
Yeah, I was going to ask that next too about, as a husband who's struggling or a wife who's struggling, what's something, I mean, I feel like moms are mostly listening to this podcast because they love you, Bethany.
We have a lot of moms.
And,
so
yeah.
I would say I've just, this is probably my last question, Mason.
Okay.
What encouragement do you have for the wife who knows her husband's struggling?
Yeah.
He hasn't been proactive. He hasn't done anything to repair the damage. She's hanging in there, but she's losing her patience. What encouragement would you have to that woman?
The first and most important thing that I would say is his problem has everything to do with him and absolutely nothing to do with you. And from the betrayal side of things, that's one of the first and deepest driven wounds is, what's wrong with me? Like, is it like, am I not attractive? Am I not this? And am I not, you know, and you start self-questioning, especially when your husband is doing something that's out of character or struggling or whatever. It's 100% him, his root issues, and his problem has nothing to do with you, right? So it's being very protective of, for a very long time in my life as a husband that had a lot of secrets and was struggling, the enemy used me as a tool for evil. And that created wounds in my life, in my wife, right? The enemy will try to use your husband to convince you to believe lies about yourself, and like the encouragement is be very aware of that and know that those things are not true. The other thing is, it's not your job to save your husband, right? Again, you can support and encourage him to go get help. That is 100% his decision to do for himself, right? You can pray for your husband. You can't be his savior, right? And, you know, if you're in a situation where your husband is stepping out of the marriage, continuing to, you know, dive into sin, completely unrepentant, maybe even blaming it on you, right? I would say that that's not an emotionally healthy situation to be in, and you need to set boundaries for yourself to protect your emotional health and the emotional health of your children. What does that look like? There's a lot more dynamics in a situation or a marriage that would determine exactly what those boundaries are. But I would say that you have a right to set boundaries for yourself in that situation to protect your mental health and the mental health of your kids. And we've walked a lot of marriages through that dynamic.
Are you
and we've
suggesting
seen a lot
like
of them
full
restored.
separation physically in the home environment? Because I feel like a lot of
There's-
people will be like, set up boundaries, but then nobody shares what are those boundaries? What does that actually look like? Because,
Yeah.
you know, it's hard to just imagine someone could take it to a very extreme or like just not know what to do.
So two things, I would say that's why there's safety in a multitude of advisors, and you need to get wise counsel on the specific details of exactly what's going on in your life. Don't make this decision by yourself, like bring trusted advisors in. The other thing, tip that I would give, something that I learned is just because you're married, if that person becomes dangerous during that time, a boundary may be that they just don't get access to your emotions, right? And so whatever boundaries you need to set up to make sure that they're not able to infiltrate and deteriorate your emotional state, which is emotional abuse, right? Those are the things that need to be set up. Sometimes that's a physical separation, sometimes that's operating in the marriage in a way where there's not emotional access during a season, right? I hope that clarifies it. And we could go through some case studies and situations and give specific advice, but
maybe we don't have to
general,
go.
that's
Wait, my mind's. I got another major question though.
Okay.
All right, go ahead.
I thought I was done, but then my mind went into AI.
You can have 3 more last questions.
Okay.
Yeah, just 3.
So now my mind went into AI, and I'm like, this is changing the face of the internet and pornography, and just the next gen is going to be exposed to even way more, and it's just kind of frightening. I think when the side of me is not looking to God, I'm just overwhelmed by the thought of AI getting involved in all this.
All the darkness,
I guess I don't know what my question is, but yeah, I mean, it's probably already
I'll answer the question that you have. So, pornography is a dissociative practice. You're disassociating from reality and diving into a world that's fantasy, that's not real, right? The combination, here's I don't want to freak you out anymore, but the combination of AI paired with virtual and augmented reality is even scarier, right? Because now what you're doing, and this is how we won't go all into this from a biblical standpoint.
I
but
can't even wrap my head around it.
It's way too much that wormhole is really deep. But you're taking the things that you desire the most and the ideal fantasy that you'd want to create. AI can create it, and then VR can allow you to live it, right? And so the danger here is, again, these high super unnatural dopamine levels that you're getting from just pornography. We think about Playboy, and then the invention of the internet, and it's these videos. Now we're stepping it up another notch, and it's you're getting an even higher dose of dopamine. Your brain's building an even higher tolerance to it, so life is even less interesting, right? And you're creating an even more disassociative mindset of life doesn't even feel as real anymore because you're so disassociated in this other world that you'd much rather be in because there's a much higher level of dopamine, right? So we look at these, the generation that's very disconnected and very withdrawn, and you have a conversation with them and all they want to do is look at their phone. It's that is continuing to increase more and more. And AI, VR, augmented reality, the combination and marriage of that stuff is we're already seeing it pop up.
Sorry, I'm so bad about interrupting, but it's worth mentioning because the chances are if it's not your husband engaging in that already, your children might end up somehow getting engaged. So just mentioning it is hey,
be aware.
I think the Unchained Leader, you and your team, is probably coming up with a plan for that sort of stuff too, because it might even be another level of unwinding or undoing and rebuilding, so to say.
Yeah.
Well,
so I'm sure you guys have a ton of testimonials of all these guys have gone through. Do you mind sharing a story of someone who's been redeemed from their traumas in the past or root issues and has found freedom?
I'll give you a few examples of not real detailed in their story. If anybody wants to hear some real life stories or go through some of our case studies, there's some case studies on our website. And then if you just look at our Google reviews, our guys sometimes will go on there and just put their story, which is really cool. And then they've obviously given public permission for that. We've had guys come in that are pastors that are leading a congregation and had a secret pornography addiction their whole lives, also have stepped out on the marriage multiple times, come in just broken, right? Feeling like they're living a double life, feeling like a hypocrite, not wanting to live anymore. And through the process, like started to understand why they were doing the things that they were doing, like how it all started, and seeing progress and actually healing, right? And we have a couple of those guys that have come through in that like very similar situations. Another pastor that was actually preaching on Sundays and then hooking up with, I don't know how.
That might
Do
be
we
too
have
much.
kids listening to this too? Yeah.
Well, we'll
Stepping
give
out
a
of his
disclaimer for
marriage.
sure
Laughing.
at the beginning of the episode, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I said some stuff already that's like
Yeah.
if you have,
It's a
like,
lot. We're
five-year-old,
definitely
right.
putting a
not-
disclaimer. And
Yeah.
I think anyone who
Okay,
knows
cool.
they're clicking onto this knows
know.
it's an intense topic.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Well, I'll throw this one out there, and then Bethany's gonna have some more last questions. But we've also walked some men, like a lot of men, through same-sex attraction, right?
wow,
And
cool.
that attraction has no limitations of if it's a pastor, if it's a deacon or elder of a church, if it's a a guy that you look at that is as masculine as you could ever think, right? I used to think that like you could spot that or something, and it's like, no, man, like we got men walking around that are experiencing that, and it's same thing as like a decade ago we thought only a few guys watched porn. It's like, no, there's a very large segment of Christian men that are struggling with this, and like we're able to walk them back through and understand why. And a lot of times it has nothing to do with anything sexual at all. It's like male relationship dynamics, either like hyper positive or hyper negative, and like the beliefs that you believe about yourself, and like how God made you and all of this stuff. We've seen some guys come through too of living that lifestyle, and then completely like transformed, of like they don't have that unwanted desire anymore either. So
Yeah, that's
I
powerful.
don't know if that was quite as detailed as what you were asking for, but
No, it's
just
all
for like
good. I feel
anonymity
like
and confidentiality. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's good to understand other stories and situations like same-sex attraction. Attraction has that same root issue that something's
Yeah.
going on that we can heal from. So
That's the stuff that I get, when we talk about that on Instagram and social media and stuff, that's when we start getting multiple death threats in my inbox, and like,
man, I
Yeah.
bet.
yeah, if we
How
talk
dare
about
you.
anything in that realm, it gets we stir stuff up real quick.
Right.
yeah. Yeah,
Well-
even though the Bible as an authority and truth is very clear about how we should live our lives.
Yeah,
that
and
respect.
here's the thing, like we don't even go, hey, if you have this attraction or you're living this lifestyle, you're wrong. All we do is we share testimonials of guys that have come in and women that have come in with the same sex attraction, realized when it started, how it started, why it was there, and no longer have it anymore. And then the people that believe that you're created that way, not that it's, they believe it's nature, not nurture. Then it's and we don't really respond to stuff like that. We just get the death threats in my inbox, and I told my guys don't even let me see them anymore. But
Right.
yeah,
Well, thanks so much for your time and being transparent with us about your journey. And thank you for creating Unchained Leader. I know it's blessing a lot of people. Where could listeners find you and learn more about Unchained Leader?
yeah. If you just Google Unchained Leader, you'll be able to see our reviews. You can find our website on there. There's some cool articles that have been written. I did a segment with Fox News a little while back that's still on the first page.
Awesome.
And then social media, my Instagram handle is official_Mason Cain, all one word. If you search that.
We'll link all
And
this
on
as
that
well.
page,
So
yeah, you can link it. And then there's some educational posts on the Instagram page and stuff like that. So we have a black book that you could pick up on our website that walks through the psychology of like why your brain desires Jesus and porn at the same time, which seems to be contradictory things. We dive into like scripture and psychology of that. And then the main pathway into our program is called The Art of Freedom. It's a mini documentary that we put together. You'll see a bunch of testimonials and case studies of our clients. And then we walk through like how the program's designed, the psychology, and like the scripture behind it and all of that cool stuff.
Sweet. That's awesome. Thanks so much for sharing that. Any last thoughts, hon?
No, thank you so much, Mason. I love this conversation. I love the work you and your team are doing, and we're cheering y'all on. And yeah, thank you so much. God bless you.
Yeah. Thank you guys for being willing to cover this topic. Not many are bold and courageous enough to step into this, so it's much appreciated.
Yeah, thank you.